Um, Warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us at very short notice for this event, and a special welcome, of course, to our panelists. It's David Lidington, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Lord Chancellor, and since very recently, Chair of the British Königswinter Steering Committee. I hope I got that right. We have Annette Dittert, well known to German audience, but she's been on German TV almost every day these last few days, commenting on what's happening in the UK. We welcome to John Kampfner, who has become extremely well known, even better than before to a British audience, because his last book, Why the Germans Do It Better, is selling extremely well in the UK. And I hear a German edition is just about to come out, or has come out. So more Germans will know about it soon. And finally, our new chairman of the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, the German-British Society, Ambassador Thomas Matussek. The four of you, with me trying to sort of help you along, will pick up on what happened in UK, at Chequers, in London at Chequers, and perhaps at Windsor too, at the end of last week, and which might very well mean a sort of new chapter in German-British relations following 5 years of agony over Brexit. Just a couple of household remarks before we get started. Number one, this session is being recorded and will be available to view it again afterwards. Second remark, I would kindly ask you, if you haven't done so, to mute your microphone so we don't get your private conversations in the middle of the panel. And thirdly, you're of course invited to contribute to the discussion. To this end, please use the chat function and just type in what you would like to comment or ask, and we will try and accommodate as many of you as possible. So let's get started. You all know what prompted us to do this tonight, and perhaps we didn't all get all the details, so I would ask Annette Dittert to get us started by just refreshing our memory. What happened in the UK as far as German-British relations are concerned last week?
Yeah, before I start, thanks for having me. And I have to forward a little warning. I mean, I've not been on telly every day with football, but also last night at Trafalgar Square, and it took me 3 hours to get home after this because it was crazy. And it was a great occasion to also now, yeah, have something happy to report. And congratulations to the English team and to all the English football fans who might be here with us now. It was a brilliant match, I think, and yeah, I have some hope that yeah, we might beat Italy as I'm an England fan, obviously. So I need to turn back the clock a little bit to think about last Friday. That seems so long ago, which it obviously isn't. I thought it was a good event, this press conference in Chequers between Angela Merkel and Boris Johnson. First of all, you could feel a really friendly atmosphere and the kind of willingness from both sides to, as Merkel put it before she went there, to start to open up a new chapter in German-British relations. And I think this is really necessary to start there now, after all what happened over the last years. And I think to re-establish trust and rebuild a relationship first now on a bilateral level is something that's really important. I was there myself, and yeah, and felt there was a real willingness to cooperate as much as it is possible at the moment, because what also was quite striking and what is an underlying problem of this whole situation is that, of course, as long as Britain isn't really willing to establish cooperation with the EU as a political entity, it will always be very difficult for Germany to have a bilateral relationship that isn't strained by that, because obviously Germany, is closely linked and has closely linked its policy to the EU policy. I put that question to Merkel, to Angela Merkel, and to the British Prime Minister. Merkel was rather, I'd say, diplomatically patient, saying, yes, of course, this is a problem, a strategic problem in the midterm for every German government that will follow her. But she more or less put it, I mean, that's at least as I've understood it. Let's go slowly now from here. Let's do it step by step. Let's first try to establish a bilateral relationship between Germany and Britain, and then maybe Britain will sort of start to approach the EU as an institution as well, which is at the moment, for domestic policy reasons, something that is rather difficult for Boris Johnson. He didn't really answer my question, and I think that's why. But I still think that this joint declaration that had been published a few days before this press conference is also rather encouraging. I mean, it's not only an annual conference that is sort of in there, it's also more regular intergovernmental consultations that will take place in the future. So I think it's important, and it's a place to start from what has been agreed there. And I think there is a lot to do on a bilateral level as well. I mean, even if it comes down to little things like school exchanges, like how to replace Erasmus on a more bilateral level. I mean, there is stuff that can be done on a bilateral level, and I felt this can be a first step. But obviously, in the midterm, it will remain a problem if the UK keeps not establishing a less, let's say, hostile relationship with the EU as a political entity.
Thank you. John, you know Germany very well and have written about it a lot and so on. What's your feeling? Is this going to sort of get to people in Germany? Are they going to? Is our government or our politicians, are they going to take this up? I mean, we all remember from Königswinter conferences that number of UK participants have always come up to Germans and said, look, shouldn't we have a special relationship? Shouldn't we have a bilateral relationship beyond the EU and things? And Germany has always been a little bit hesitant on everything. Now, of course, the Brexit issue is sort of, well, more or less over with. Is there a chance for this sort of really getting off the ground?
Well, good evening, Rupert, and good evening, everybody, and Thomas and David. And it's always it's an honor to follow Annette, and we're in a reverse geographical situation where she is in London, in the center of London, and I'm in the center of Berlin. And it's great to be with you. And Annette set out the situation, the Chequers meeting and the joint agreement very well, so I won't go over that. I'll just say make a few observations that yes, this is an important opportunity, and it is good that Merkel went to Chequers and had her photo opportunity and more with the Queen, which went down exceedingly well in the German media. And these things matter. Even if the substance was relatively light, the mood music is important. David and Thomas know that from their governmental and their diplomatic roles, how important that kind of the atmospherics are alongside the substance. Yes, I mean, it is an important opportunity. In Germany, as we all know, everybody is gearing up for the elections at the end of September. A new government, a new coalition, and a new era, without Merkel bestriding the stage, and how important that is. And in some ways people think, oh, these elections, it's almost all preordained. Everybody knows it's going to be a CDU Green or a possibly CDU Green FDP. It's all sort of, you know, there's nothing exciting. Actually, well, elections are never predictable, but also the extent to which Merkel's absence will be felt domestically and internationally has not yet been, I think, properly factored in. by the populace and by others. It will be a huge moment for Germany. It'll be a huge moment for Europe. It's an opportunity to reset, to use that now overused phrase when it comes to foreign relations, in relations with Britain. I think one should be optimistic, but also extremely realistic about the potential. Being outside the European Union, as German interlocutors always say to us, means that we are outside the family. And that is a different order of relationship, and that needs to be accepted as such. The Franco-German motor, which was always there, and one could assign a sort of three-legged stool or a triangle or whatever, it used to be the case with Britain. It isn't that anymore. It is France and Germany at the heart of the European Union, Britain deliberately making itself outside. And so therefore, what can be achieved at governmental level will be much more limited, knowingly so, will be much more limited to certain areas, particularly those that are not necessarily under the remit of the European Union, such as security and defense. That having been said, there are opportunities, and there are considerable opportunities. As Annette said, we have to finesse this question of Britain wants everything to be bilateral, and the German government wants as much as possible to be through the prism, the structures of the European Union, and smart diplomats can finesse that fundamental difference in certain areas, but they can't finesse all of it. But we do have an opportunity on bilateral. I would strongly urge, and it was great that Königswinter was mentioned in the communique as a forum. This is a great opportunity. And now with a new regime change at Königswinter, that is also an opportunity to look at things afresh, and maybe to look at things beyond intergovernmental relations, because there are always bumps in the road when it comes to governments. And there is a lot that can be done on the bilateral level, obviously, that requires governmental intervention, but also a lot that can be done that doesn't require governmental intervention. And I know that the German government is very keen on strengthening relations with Britain's other nations and national governments, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and also with the regions as well. And a huge opportunity, likewise, with the Länder. Obviously, the NRW representation in Berlin has often been the host of Königswinter, and that particular Land is going to be at the center of all things in this new government. But so there are huge opportunities on that. And I will also just make one further point, because there are many other things to say in response to others. And that is, it would be a great opportunity, and it's good that culture was mentioned and the science prize. This is a really important opportunity, I think, in the bilateral relationship, also to relate the Franco-German relationship to the lived experience. That is the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Brits who are in Germany, working in startups, working in engineering firms, working in high tech, working in culture and the creative industries, and vice versa. And not just in the capital city, but all over the country. And in some ways, getting that wider sense of mutual collaboration, I think, is both an opportunity with government relations being fractious, but I also think it's a good in and of itself.
Thank you. David, you're part of the new regime that John mentioned. What's your feeling? Is this an important moment to start the new regime?
Oh, I think I'm delighted to be greeted as a member of the new regime. I think that you know, some people in the present government in Britain would regard me as very much part of the ancien regime, you know, that narrowly escaped the guillotine, you know. But yeah, I agree with a great deal of what both John and Annette said. I mean, as I look at it, the recent events, the bilateral declaration, the Merkel visit, very welcome indeed. I think that there was a signal from Germany to London that, okay, we wish you hadn't left, but this relationship's still important, and we wish you'd had a close relationship with the EU after departure, but if what you really want is bilateral, let's see what we can do with it. There's some important things there. And I think from the UK side, also, the declaration is a signal, obviously to Berlin, but also to other European capitals. Look, we do still take you seriously. And that backs up things that were in the British government's recent integrated review of security policy, where, although it's still, for me, disappointingly, demonstrated a bit of a neuralgia about dealing with the EU institutionally, there was some very warm words about relationships with individual European countries, including Germany, and a very definite commitment, despite the so-called tilt to the Indo-Pacific, that the great majority of UK resource and effort spent on security would be in the Euro-Atlantic region still. So I think the fact that British and German officials and ministers are not meeting week by week in Brussels, at and in the margins of council meetings and Coreper and so on, and not doing bilateral business over EU dossiers, really does make it all the more important that we work as two countries on the institutional relationships that were signaled in the joint declaration from Heiko Maas and Dominic Raab, and that organizations like Königswinter play their part. I think we're going to have to carry a greater share of the burden in the future, because those government-to-government relationships are just not going to be as frequent and intense as they have been for most of the last half century. I think that we have to watch out for a number of things. I think that on the UK side, as I've said, I think the current government is still neuralgic about dealing with the EU institutionally. I hope that heals with time, but at the moment we're still in an age of aftershocks following the earthquake. I think the British government also underestimates how far down the agenda of most European governments the UK has now fallen. When the EU leaders meet at European Council, they've not got Brexit and the consequences of Brexit anywhere near the top of their agenda, if it's on the agenda at all. There's many more things they're thinking about. I don't think that's really been understood in Downing Street. And I think also that that London, I mean, while it's been reassured that Biden wants a good relationship with the UK still, he's not throwing the UK overboard, far, far from it, values that relationship and that alliance. I think there's not a full understanding yet that Biden also wants the UK and the EU, both of them, to sort out their squabbling and to focus on what in Washington's view is the big picture, which is the strategic challenge from Putin and increasingly from Xi's China. On the EU side, I think there's still sometimes a wish to talk up the EU's place as a geopolitical actor globally that isn't borne out by the reality. Trade and regulation, yes, certainly accept that. But on the politics, Borrell's visit to Moscow last year, sanctions against Belarus held up by a Cypriot veto, a rather sort of incoherent position over the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, those don't yet, for the reasons I'm very familiar with, unanimity and all that, it doesn't add up to the EU being a forceful geopolitical actor in the way that it is a really heavyweight actor on trade, commercial, and regulatory matters. And I think that neither in London nor in Brussels has there been sufficient thought at any time in the last 5 years about what, after the UK referendum, we each want the future strategic relationship to be with the other, because the importance of the neighbour is still going to be enormous. And I think that these are things that Königswinter might explore. What do we mean with the stuff in the joint declaration about cooperating in Africa, where there are multiple and overlapping challenges? About the Western Balkans, where the UK still has an interest and has a historic involvement, and where it seems to me that the democratic European action is going to be more effective if the UK is involved in some way, particularly given that Berlin and Paris both seem to have given up on further enlargement for the time being. So what is the offer to the Western Balkans at a time when Vucic and when the Montenegrins too seem to be slipping rather back towards sympathy with Putin? What can we do with the debate over technology and the strategic challenge from China that we all face? And how does the need for a comprehensive Western alternative to China sit with the pressures, whether for strategic autonomy in Europe or national independence in the UK or America first in Washington, to shorten supply chains and protect our own producers and our own markets? How do those fit together? And then another issue we might look at is integration of minorities. Both the UK and Germany have had to face large-scale movement of people from other parts of the world, often with different cultural and religious traditions. And that has led to tensions in both our societies. What have we each found works and what have we each found does not work? What experiences can we share and debate and learn from? And so I think that there is a huge agenda, an exciting agenda that Königswinter can pursue in the months and the years ahead. And above all, I think in the absence of those frequent intergovernmental dealings when we were both in the EU, interpreting each country to the other, trying to build mutual understanding and deeper understanding, and being unafraid to talk candidly as friends about our disagreements, as well as opportunities for agreement and common work, is absolutely essential as a task in the years ahead.
Thank you, David. You've presented us with a big European panorama, which is in a way quite astonishing, because Her Majesty's government has always tried to say, now we're going to be the global ones, and you get out of the way, you Europeans, you Germans, you just get out of the way. But I would certainly agree with that. Thomas, you know the United Kingdom exceedingly well because you were ambassador to London. You are well sort of versed in German politics. Do you see all these things happening that David sort of pointed to, what we could do together? Do you see this actually becoming real politics?
Well, thank you. First of all, Rupert, congratulations for bringing this group together, because it was your idea to do it so quickly and so fast. And I think, as we have seen so far, it's a wonderful opportunity to exchange ideas. Yes, but to answer your questions, I think let me take a step back. When we were both in the EU, it turned out that on very, very fundamental issues, Britain was our most important ally. It was most important on fiscal discipline, on market economy, on fight against over-bureaucratization, centralization, and so on. And that is missed now. With this gap we have now in the Brexit agreement, I think it's quite natural that we want to salvage as much as possible from that. I was, I must say, pleasantly surprised on the backdrop of my own experience in London in the 70s and also as ambassador, that Britain was so ready and in many respects even took the initiative to come to some sort of structured cooperation. Because traditionally, my experience was, you want to be free. You don't want to be forced into a corset, but I think the realization has sunk in, if you want to be effective, you have to have some sort of agreed procedure of structure. You don't want constantly to create new coalitions of the willing, etc., etc. Now, I underwrite everything which has been said so far, but a number of things I think I would like to stress. First of all, when I look at the text as such, I see very clearly that every third paragraph or so, there is a line saying everything we're going to do, we do it in full transparency towards the other EU members, because we see, of course, that there is a certain soupçon, to put it primitively, that Britain might try to drive a wedge between us and the Europeans. This is one thing. The second thing is, in the preambular or in the press release, there is a sentence that Germany again stresses the highest importance to keep the EU together and to do things on a worldwide scale as the EU, which does not preclude it from having a very close relationship with others. Look, the US is not a member of the EU. It's a very, very strong member. We have a strategic dialogue with India, etc. So there is a lot of scope we can do. And the good thing is, if I remember one point where we constantly disagreed while UK was a member of the EU, was foreign security policy of the EU. Whenever we said we Europeans have to get the act together, they have to have more, military clout. Immediately, the reaction on the British side was, well, that's going to weaken NATO. I remember I once asked a British, very high-ranking general, what do you think about the European army? And his answer was, well, actually, we have a European army. We call it NATO. These quarrels are now a thing of the past. Now, relationship within and beside the EU with the people who have the necessary economic, political, and in the case of Britain, military muscle is not something terribly new. I remember from my time in New York, the formula, the European three, the E3, did very good work on Iran, the beginning of Iran. Then as a young man, when I worked for Helmut Schmidt, we used to have the Berlin Four. These were the three Western allies and Germany, and we were supposed to talk only about Berlin. But as it turned out, it was a very handy formula to talk about all things in the world, and most of it was behind closed doors, confidential, until the Italian ambassador appeared at the door and complained heavily that we were doing something special here. Now, I think in this sense, it's a good first step. Another point I would like to pick up from David, the role of Königswinter. I think that we are mentioned is a wonderful peg on which we can hang things. It gives us legitimacy, which is very, very important. And whenever we raise our voice, we can say, look, guys, you tasked us specifically, the civil society and Königswinter, to raise our voice on these and these issues. And I'm saying that with regard to certain things which were mentioned in the press conference. There was a mention of a cooperation treaty. I mean, so far, I knew about a treaty from the proposal of Norbert Röttgen and Tom Tugendhat, the friendship treaty. I don't know if it sank or not, but I haven't heard it for a very while. Then these bilateral regular cabinet meetings. In my youth, when I was in the Chancery, we used to have it. We were both members of the EU, but like the French, we had with the Brits these joint cabinet meetings once a year. So I think we are getting back to a sort of relationship where we are actually not hampered by our membership in the EU, but where we believe that we can strengthen the clout of the EU with Britain as a natural ally, not as a family member, but a natural ally who sits as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, who has the capability and the will of global power projection, who is a nuclear power. So we can turn it into a win-win situation for us in Germany. And I think I'll leave it at that at the moment.
Right. Thank you. We'll come back to Königswinter in a moment. I'd just like to do two things before. At one, I'd like to ask the other panelists whether they'd like to come in and respond to something that any one of the others has just said. Do I see? Would anyone of the others like to come in at this point? No, it seems you're
Annette.
Quite happy. Yes, sorry. Yes, please do.
Just a very short point I would like to make to what David said and Thomas. David encouraging us to be open and frank. I mean, what I see all that as well, and I think it's a wonderful, image to say Britain is not member of the family anymore, but it's a strong ally. But I think the more, and now picking up what David said, to be open and frank. I mean, the more the UK-EU conflict escalates, and at the moment over the Northern Ireland Protocol, I can't really see there is any willingness of this government to de-escalate this conflict. The more the German-British relation will be burdened by that, and I think it's just something we shouldn't completely forget in this discussion. That's my point.
Thank you. David or John, would you like to come in at this point?
No, I think if I may, very quickly.
Yes, please do.
You're absolutely right. We should not lose sight of it. On the other hand, we have to ask ourselves, if we raise our voice on these neuralgic points, are we contributing to a solution of a problem, or do we make things worse? And here we have to be a little bit sensitive. For instance, as far as Northern Ireland concerned, or another point which might come on later, as far as dialogue, let's say, with Scotland and the other nations of Britain is concerned. We have it on the radar screen, but I think especially in the beginning of this beautiful courtship, we should not overload the circuits. We should be a little bit sensitive to the sensitivity of the Brits. I mean, my hackles get raised on a lot of statements coming out of Whitehall these days, but I swallow it because I think there's no use to get into a shouting match here.
Mm-hmm. I think, Rupert, I think just to add to that, I think one shouldn't shy away from difficult issues, but I agreed with the warning that Thomas just gave. And I also think we have to look at this as a project that it is going to take quite a few years of work. I mean, my view is that common interests will, in time, bring the UK and the EU to a new, different sort of equilibrium in the relationship. But at the moment, we are in a situation where Brexit is still, in terms of the legal act, and then even more so the practical consequences of that legal act, are very recent history. And where you have a British government, that was elected, and a prime minister who got the premiership on the basis of a particular approach to Brexit, and you have in Berlin and elsewhere in the 27 capitals of the institutions very bruised feelings, which range from hurt to fury at what has been happening. It will take time for those things to calm down, and they'll be influenced by, for example, what happens in the United States. Do we get a second Biden or Harris term, or do we get a Trump or Trump-esque administration in 4 years' time? That will have a bearing on things. I'm just, the reason I remain hopeful is because I look at common interests. I look at what the Johnson government has actually done in terms of international policy. And I look at Israel, Palestine, I look at Iran, I look at climate, perhaps particularly. I look at the Sahel. And on all those, he has stayed pretty much with the mainstream European position, despite all the urgings from Trump when he was in office. The E3 has remained active and engaged, despite all the real difficulties elsewhere in the relationship. So there are some good things to work on, and not least the depth of the civil society institutional relationships and the personal relationships between the two countries.
But if I one last word,
John was first. He's been waiting to come out, and you'll come back.
I'm happy to defer to you, Thomas, and then I'll follow.
No, just one sentence, and then I really shut up. And the good news is, whatever government comes out of the German elections, it will be a very Anglophile and pro-British government. Yeah. There's not a single party among the numerical of them who would say, well, let's change tack here. And that's good news. That is my last sentence. Yeah.
Okay. So now, John, please.
Oh, I mean, thank you to your final point, Thomas. I would also say, but it is a particularly, and these things should not be seen in contradistinction, but it is a particularly pro-French and pro-European government under Lachette, assuming it to be he. And relations between Merkel and Macron have been tetchy, fairly frequently. The Germans sent to the French, playing games occasionally and surprising Germany too often. I think that will improve, and therefore, in a German context, the process of greater European integration and harmonization, which is at the moment in a pretty bad state in terms of a joint foreign policy, I think the prospects of that may improve. Obviously, it will depend on the French election results as well, but assuming Macron is re-elected. No, I suppose my other point is this. I mean, at the moment, I mean, to David's point about relationships being a combination now of hurt and fury, absolutely correct. And how long that continues to play out will depend in part on behaviors. And to be quite blunt, when David Frost makes speeches and interventions that are designed to antagonize, that are designed for a domestic audience, that is being encouraged to see Europe as somewhere between an adversary and an enemy, and I choose my words carefully and deliberately, we have a problem. And that does need to, hopefully it will play itself out. But I would also strike a long-term, a more optimistic note. And if you take the view that the UK was always uncomfortable inside, or at least a certain part of the UK was uncomfortable inside the political structures, and therefore a combination of the media and a lot of people in politics were always drawing out what was wrong in the relationship and what was wrong in the European Union, we could bizarrely get to a situation, as much out of desire as out of need, where the reverse might happen, and we could eventually, once the sort of silly games that are being played at the moment have worn themselves out, of creating a new kind of relationship that might be a little bit to motherhood and apple pie, but I think there is the potential for that. And I do go back to my point about also the emphasis on non-governmental actors. If you look at the strength of the Franco-German youth exchanges, for example, which are statutory, which are very properly invested, and that makes a big difference. That makes a big difference in the way people think and the way people behave. And it's no surprise that so many people voted to leave the EU when there was so little education about the EU, there was so little positive that was said, and so many Britons didn't have reference points to Europe. So as I say, it may be a little bit too long-term, given all the acrimony at the moment, but we have, certainly in an Anglo-German context, the potential, after many years of being asleep on the job, of creating people-to-people contacts that could actually be better than they've been before.
Thank you. Now, my feeling is, and I don't know whether I'm right, that in Germany, most people are quite relaxed about the sort of very big issues, but they do worry about sort of hands-on problems that are coming our way, and very sort of practical issues. And this is in a way is reflected, if I look at the chat here, there are comments on what's going to happen as Erasmus has gone out. What about UK-EU visa arrangements for school kids, students, musicians, actors, sports people, etc.? That seems to be sort of on people's minds very much. Now, question, I don't know who would like to pick this up. Do you feel if we do have a sort of cooperation agreement in place, can we sort out these practical issues that citizens are really worrying about? Who would like to sort of comment on that? Thomas.
Yeah, I think, and I come back to what was said earlier, the fact that the importance of civil society in Königswinter especially is written in here. It gives us the right and legitimacy to talk to politicians on both sides and make certain requests and demands. I know it will be very, very difficult and all sorts of things play into it, but I think this gives us a very, very good pick to hang on some of these things. The Franco-German youth exchange, even in my time as ambassador in London, we used it as a template. And I wonder if that was a good idea, because it was so huge and the political effort from both sides was so strong that it was clear that we would never reach that goal. But then what happened, that the ambition on both sides went down and down. And I remember the state visit of the Queen in 2005. In her speech, she announced the youth exchange service and put on it quite a strong marker and said, this is what we're going to do in the future. And so much, nothing has happened. And now we have the chance to renew this, to come back to this idea. And I would be interested, because I don't know how far work in the administration has progressed on the cooperation treaty, which we are expecting now after the remarks of the Chancellor on the press conference. And Rupert, perhaps somebody is here from the Auswärtiges Amt who can enlighten us a little bit.
Yes, I think Philipp Rösler from the German Foreign Office is in the audience, and perhaps this is a good moment if you'd like to come in.
Yes, thank you so much. Philipp Rösler from the division covering the UK in the Federal Foreign Office. And formally, I can see David Lidington smiling. I was wondering whether he remembered me. I used to work at the German embassy in London. I was based there for a few years. So I've been covering this and following this quite closely. And
remember you well, Philip.
Thank you so much. And I've seen a lot of familiar names and faces, some of which I know only from screens, unfortunately, but very good to be here. Thank you for having me. And a wonderful event, and I'm very happy the pride of the little civil servant that the joint declaration is receiving so much attention. That is really very encouraging and very motivating. And I am happy to try to answer these questions and maybe add one or two points if I may. On youth exchange and the role of civil society, I would like to add, reacting to John Kampfner's remarks, that is absolutely spot on. I think there's a great sense of humility amongst my colleagues and my superiors, that with our government-to-government connections and interactions, we can certainly do an important step towards increasing interaction between our countries. And more importantly, I would argue, set the right framework for other actors like Königswinter. And as Thomas Matussek pointed out, it is not by accident that we put it in the text, to do their work and to play a vital role, because it's good that ministers and civil servants speak, but it's far better when civil societies interact and carry, I would argue, the extent of the larger bandwidth of interactions between our countries. So that's very well understood, and we understand this joint declaration as an aspect, a part of this effort to provide the environment that is suited to civil society interaction. And to answer that question specific to the cooperation agreement or treaty, whatever you want to call it, that is, of course, would be the next step. So we laid the groundwork with the joint declaration. I think visits like the Chancellor's visit are always an important moment to impart some dynamics into this kind of thing. Of course, the next government will have to be in the driver's seat for that, for the German side of things. that is understood. We cannot sort of preempt what the new government is going to say, but we are in the process of organizing amongst ministerial departments within the Bundesregierung, within the federal government, to agree on issues and topics that haven't been dealt with in the past, that might be insufficiently thought of beforehand, and that we would like to raise in a bilateral setting with the UK. And we will most certainly prepare what the Chancellor mentioned as well, the cabinet meetings, which are to take place after some time after the elections, on a slightly lower level, permanent undersecretary level. So in German, that would be Staatssekretär, to pave the way and identify the issues we want to talk about. So the process has started. I would like to add, which I think Thomas Matussek and David Lidington also said that of course our reflex on the German government side will always be to first look at the European side of things, at the EU side of things rather, and identify solutions at this level. So for instance, our preferred solution would of course be for the UK to join Erasmus+. And only if there can't be found any solution in this area at an EU-UK level, then bilateral options should be explored. And this will be our reflex throughout the large, huge bandwidth of things we want to discuss. Always in the spirit of finding a solution that provides a creative space for actors like Königswinter.
Thank you very much. Since my usual day-to-day job is to be the director of a think tank on civil society, I'm of course absolutely delighted that civil society comes up so strongly in this discussion, and I can just encourage everybody to sort of hold on to that and keep that line. Would anybody from the panel like to comment on what's just being said? If not, we might turn to Königswinter. And I'd just like to remind you that one of Königswinter's sort of real long-term supporters, Ralph Dahrendorf, always used to say we must develop foreign policy from a foreign policy of governments to a foreign policy of societies. And this is what he tried to introduce into conferences, Königswinter conferences many years ago. So I think we have quite a good tradition we can follow. Now let's just question two chairs of Königswinter. How do you see Königswinter developing under the sort of new conditions that we've been talking about? Where do you see Königswinter? Well, who'd like to start? David, would you like to come in?
I think I mean, and the trouble is with this, how do you limit what you did? I think there's two things on this. In terms of content, I think that it'll be important in Königswinter that we try to focus on areas where bilateral discussion and bilateral action are both attainable and desirable, and also do not risk setting up clashes with the EU position there, because I think it just makes it difficult for particularly German government interlocutors if we start getting too much, at least at the start, into territory that is for example, EU exclusive competence. But I think that still leaves us with plenty of stuff. I think I would like to see, certainly we need to continue to talk about environmental matters. I think we should be talking about technology, because digital technology is going to shake up all our assumptions about work and about the relationship of education to careers and expectations parents have for their children into the future. And COVID, and the way COVID has accelerated the changes that might otherwise have taken place over 5 or 10 years, I think has illustrated how difficult those challenges are going to be. So climate, technology, and that will give us plenty to work on, but I think also security matters. There are issues to do with Russia, whether in Eastern Europe or in the Western Balkans. There are multiple issues to do with Africa, as I have said. I think one could talk about Indo-Pacific, and what does the strategic challenge from China mean? What are the British and the German perspectives on defense capabilities given the impact of AI and of robotics upon defense capabilities and configurations? I mean, there's a range of things. I think when it comes to the other thing I want to do is people, who comes. And the first thing I want to say is that I think that we have got to work hard to make Königswinter more diverse than it is at the moment, more representative of our societies. Now, it's partly about getting more women. It's partly about getting, I mean, being absolutely blunt, more black and brown faces at Königswinter conferences. But it's also about ensuring diversity of opinion and of experience. Yeah. I would like to see on the British side, we ought to have people from regional governments, some of the metro mayors, for example, both Conservative and Labour mayors, who are forging new approaches to urban regeneration, to reinvigorating cities. And it'd be interesting to have a session where we had similar spokesmen and women from Germany, so that we had an exchange of experience on this. If we were to get onto Northern Ireland, I probably don't advise it right at the moment, but not this side of the imminent Northern Ireland elections. But I would want to have people from Northern Ireland there, so we heard directly from them instead of just us pontificating about them. We need to hear directly from more young people than we have tended to do in Königswinter. I want our business sponsors not only to send their top executives, I want to see them still, but I want them to bring along, each of them, 1 or 2 bright men and women in their 20s or 30s for an experience that will help their career development, but also give us those young perspectives on the world they're going to inherit.
Thank you. Before I call on Thomas to share his views, I just want to point out that from the chat, a very important point has been made that Königswinter is all very well, but what about the bilateral societies, the various regional Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaften scattered all over Germany, the British-German Association in London that is trying to regionalize and have more branches and things. They need to be in on this too. So perhaps, Thomas, you can say something about Königswinter and about other sort of non-governmental, non-state initiatives that we already have.
Yeah. Picking up on David's point about diversity, about regionalization, about the city programs, I think that's absolutely on the spot. And perhaps for those who know me, I can go back to my years as head of the Alfred Harrison Society. This was our flagship program, Urban Age, developments in cities, between cities, etc. And I think also issues which have, among all the wonderful things which David pointed out, which I support, different cultures of going about it. For instance, risk averseness in Germany, whereas the typical can-do spirit on the British side. And that reminds me of a conference I once did with the city of Chattanooga, the new Silicon Valley, called Scheitern als Chance, failure as an opportunities, with startups from both sides of the Atlantic. And this was a powerhouse of ideas, something along that lines. Everything else, David, is absolutely along the lines I feel very strongly about, and we talked about it in the past. And one additional, more if you want so operational point, I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea, after having had during a conference such wonderful exchanges, to put it after the conference in a letter to the two heads of government and said, these are our recommendations, 1, 10 or so. And then the next time we meet, or before next time, ask what has come out of this cooperation, because I hate to see wonderful ideas go to waste. We all go a separate path. So I'm just throwing these out, having been on the job now for, what, 2.5 weeks. Don't expect a Gesamtkonzept from me, but this comes to my mind. And as far as regionalization is concerned, on the German side, it shouldn't be a problem because we are a very regionalized country. And we have these 12 regional organizations who are more or less active all over the place. I think the trick will be to find the right partners and the right interlocutors on the British side without getting, at this moment in time, too deeply involved into the devolution debate, because this is another can of worms we should keep on the back burner for the time being.
Okay. Now I'm calling on Annette and John. If you hear what our two chairs have been saying, does this look like a good plan, Annette?
Yes, I mean, I agree fully with what Thomas and David said here, that it's really good that Königswinter is mentioned in the joint declaration, because that gives us another kind of weight when we would do something like Thomas suggested, that to make it more sustainable, as we have. I mean, it's just really in there, and I thought that was quite a good sign that these kind of bilateral institutions are still worth something. And I think that's exactly where we have to start. And I agree with David, we shouldn't try to start with conflicts or territory that is too close to the neuralgic points at the moment, but rather try to establish trust, re-establish relations on a bilateral basis. And then I think it's a great idea to make it a bit more formal, a bit more sustainable, and say, okay, this is what we have agreed on. This is recommendations to make it more effective as well. I mean, it's true that very often we had wonderful discussions in Königswinter, and then it just sort of, nothing happened till next year. So I think if we can manage using this thing as a peg, as Thomas said, manage to make Königswinter into something more verbindlich, more kind of, more sustainable, then that would be a great step forward. And I think, given that you're in your job only 1.5 weeks, that's a really, I think, an idea worth thinking about.
John, would you like to come in on this?
Yeah, well, just briefly, I mean, I concur with everything that has been said, which I have felt for.
How dull! I'd hope that somebody would say, "I don't agree at all."
But I would no. I mean, I would refer you back to my opening remarks, which is it's I mean, absolutely on the diversity agenda, on the diversity of opinion agenda, on the diversity of geography, of background, of age. Not to mention gender and ethnicity, absolutely. I think we are all at one on this. I would also say that there's potential for Königswinter to operate, depending on resource and depending on how it works, on a sort of multi-layered approach. There is the annual sort of bells and whistles conference, and I like the idea of there being a sort of set of recommendations or resolutions that follow on from that go to the two respective governments. And obviously there is a limited capacity for invitations, and for participation needs to be handled deftly, and it definitely, change needs to happen, but at the same time that needs to be handled well. But I'm sure that will be. But I also think in a multi-layered way, one can introduce all different kinds of discussions, initiatives, which are not talking shops. They're also genuine. They can be B2B exchanges. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the role of the creative industries, the role of creative tech, Germany going through, excuse me, a sort of slightly belated digitization process, and absolutely this question of connecting opportunities, connecting experiences on a number of fronts. So absolutely, I mean, when one talks about civil society or people to people, it can slightly sort of remind me of the sort of the kind of stuff I used to hear as a young journalist in the Soviet Union. Oh yes, let's get sort of people-to-people initiatives together, and people just sort of say nice sort of platitudinous things to each other and go away feeling better about themselves, with a sort of goodie bag or something alongside it. That's absolutely not what I'm envisaging and suggesting. We're talking, as I say, I mean, here in Berlin, not far from where I am now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of Brits who've been here either a short time or a long time. And they have nothing to do with any of the discussions that take place at Königswinter and vice versa in the UK.
Yeah.
And how we get them to be part of that. And they've got a huge amount to contribute. Yeah. That's a really interesting challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, very good point. Now I see Peter Barnes is with us. He is our other sort of UK counterpart beside the Königswinter Steering Committee. There is also the British-German Association in London, of which Peter Barnes is the chair. And Peter, what would you like to come in on?
Well, thank you very much, Rupert. I was really following in on your invitation to explain what the other British-German Association is doing. And we have, at the British-German Association, been going through over the past 3 or 4 years precisely the process of reform, renewal and rejuvenation that David mentioned for as some of his goals for Königswinter. And I had an extremely encouraging conversation earlier this afternoon with Thomas Matussek about us doing much more together with the Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft in the future than we have in the past. We have the advantage that we have now a staff of 2.5 professional employees, in addition to a very active executive committee. And so we may be able to play the role of taking forward some of the items discussed at Königswinter and helping to translate those into active steps during the remainder of the year. So just to take one example, David mentioned involving metro mayors in future Königswinter conferences. We are already working very closely with Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester and with Steve Rotherham in the Liverpool City region. And we are hoping to help them set up partnerships of some kind with equivalent regions in Germany. So that is one idea of the way in which the BGA can complement the role of Königswinter. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. It looks as if the two foreign ministers have opened Pandora's box. They put in Königswinter and other groups at the very end, hoping that nobody would read that far. But
in a constructive and creative fashion, Rupert.
Yes.
I mean, we don't want to take our Greek myth implications too far.
Of course we don't. But still, what we're seeing is that there's the non-state actors in all this are taking up the cue and are really going to go forward. We're sort of coming to the end of our time, and I apologize to others in the audience whom I haven't been able to sort of call on to speak up. But I would like to give everybody on the panel a chance just to make some remarks before we close. Who would like to start? Who is sort of ready to start? Annette, yes, please.
I make it very brief. I just thought this was a very good panel here today. I thought it was I've been to so many Zoom conferences where I thought, okay, when is it? But this, I think, is a possibility now to really take this opportunity that Königswinter is in this joint declaration and make something out of it. And I thought this was very constructive. And I'm equally rather optimistic that in the long run, as David pointed it out, that common interests will prevail, and there will be a very slow, and I agree, it will take time, and it's at the moment extremely difficult, but there will be a slow path back to some cooperation between the UK and the EU as well, but this cannot be rushed. So I think all we can do at the moment is to slowly re-establish relationships between Germany and Britain, which Königswinter always has been in difficult times the institution for. So I thought this was really rather, yeah, constructive today. And I must say it leaves me a little bit more optimistic than I was when we started, which I think might be a good sign.
Wow, that's something. Yes. John, would you like to come in?
No, except to say I agree with everything that that you've all said. It's in a spirit of concurrence and in a spirit of emphasizing, putting into action what I was talking about. I'm off shortly after this to a natural history museum exhibition right in the middle of the Berghain nightclub. So, which is very much an Anglo-German initiative. You know, it is completely sort of Anglo-German, and that is the sort of thing that I'm talking about at one level. It absolutely does not remove the political engagement and the political conclusions, and I love this idea of the Königswinter conclusions, and a more active throughput to the two foreign ministries and to the two chancelleries and prime minister's office. That is on one level, but I absolutely think that there is a lot of serious business, I'm talking about business and work being done that we need to be able to harness.
Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I think well, I think it was a very good start and a lot of very good ideas, and we make sure on our side that these ideas get not thrown immediately in the waste paper basket, but we will keep on working on them. And as David said before, I mean, it's a long march. It's not, I mean, we Germans feel as soon as we've written a concept, the problem is solved, but then it really starts. And I think we start from here, and we should have perhaps these ad hoc sessions much more frequently in the future. And doesn't need to be very, very long, very detailed, but as a sort of refresher or as an awareness exercise. So thank you very much, Rupert, and thanks to all of you for taking part in this.
Thank you. And David, you have the last word.
Thanks very much, Rupert. I'd reiterate my thanks to you and to everybody who'd taken part. I think that the John Kampfner excuse that you know, he's attending a Berlin nightclub in order to visit an exhibition on natural history is likely to pass into the folklore of the great euphemisms of our age. I just had three very brief things. It's been a very enjoyable and I think very constructive conversation in the last hour and a bit. One is we need to do more of these one-off occasions. One thing I think that the enforced Zoom experience of the last year and a half has taught every think tank and civil society organization is that while there are things that are of immense value that you can only get when people meet face to face and interact by physical meeting and conversation, that there are other things you can get out of the online facility. And one of those is it is much easier to convene webinars, panels, lectures, where speakers and audiences can be in different countries or indeed different continents. And so I think that with that experience, we certainly in Königswinter, and Thomas and I have been talking about, we should be doing more of this sort of event, one-off panels, one-off speeches, and not put all the load onto a single conference, although that conference needs to be of continued high quality and high value. Secondly, I think we need to have more of a social media presence than we do at the moment, and that is something I'm looking to build. Third, to take up the point that you made and which Peter Barnes developed, there are indeed a number of different organizations that are active in this field. Each has particular strengths and particular experience and expertise. And the way I conceive of it is a network of organizations. I think it would be a mistake to try to fold all these different organizations into a single structure. Actually, we'd lose a lot doing that, but looking for ways, particularly if we're going to have more one-off events, of cooperative action on a particular subject or a particular event, a particular dialogue, is a very good way in which to move forward, because we're going to need to use all these different channels to keep the relationship going and developing.
Well, thank you very much. This leaves us with a lot of homework to do. And I hope you will all join in the activities which we must now take up. When we sent out the invitation, we said a new phase in Anglo-German relations with a question mark. And I think we can now put an exclamation mark there and say, yes, thanks to the new regime we have here, and thanks to the push we got from a joint declaration from the foreign ministers and to a new, phase in history, there is a big chance that we can do some positive work, make something out of this, and I'm quite sure we will jointly be able to do this. Thank you all very much for joining us here. Thank you especially Annette and John and David and Thomas for joining the panel and contributing the way you did. Thank you to Philip Rösler from the Foreign Office for his remarks, and of course to Peter Barnes. And yes, we will continue this way. We will have one-off online meetings to continue the conversation. So have a nice evening. Thank you.